Today, we will learn and define the major types of stimulant substances, including the chemical classifications and common examples. Differentiate the physiological and psychological effects of stimulants on the human body and mind, including short-term and long-term effects. Explain the pharmacological effects of nicotine on the central nervous system and the body's various systems. Evaluate the physiological effects of caffeine, including the impact on mood, cognition, and physical performance. Analyze the sources of caffeine and its prevalence in everyday products and everyday consumption patterns. Evaluate the physiological effects of caffeine, including its impact on mood, cognition, and physical performance. Let's dive into biblical foundation. 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 12. The verse says, I have the right to do anything, but not everything is beneficial. We can interpret that as we all have a choice to do what we would like, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's walking in the life with Jesus. And so we have to be vigilant in understanding what God wants us to do and how Jesus provided an example of what God wants us to live our life as. So as we can do anything, we have to be cognizant what is beneficial. Being cautious against allowing any substance or behavior to become a source of enslavement. Major types of stimulants and stimulant substances. We are very familiar with amphetamines, cocaine, methylphenidate, nicotine, and caffeine. Stimulants are a class of drugs that enhance and provide enhancement to the central nervous system. It helps with energy and alertness. But we all know that consumption of any substance can cause deterioration and impact to our body, cognitively and physically. The physiological and psychological effects of stimulants. It increases heart rate, blood pressure, alertness, and energy. It causes the feeling of euphoria, like you're on top of the world, like nothing can stop you. Those are the short-term effects. The long-term effects, continuous use of anything impacts toleration and also addictive behavior, the dependency, and also impacts how we withdraw off the substance. It causes cardiovascular issues. It can increase symptoms of anxiety, paranoia, and mood disorder. It also can impact appetite suppression, elevate body temperature. Those are short-term effects. And then we discuss the mood influx, the ups and downs, and the dependency of the drug. Well, the indigenous uses cocoa leaf as a medicinal property. It is purposes to create energy and connection to the spiritual realm. But then as exploration that happened from Europe in the 1800s, cocoa was separated. Cocaine came from the cocoa leaf, which increased the potency. Then the product of cocaine, they decided to use it in IV injection and smoking. Sigmund Freud is very known in the psychological world as he is the father of the modern psychoanalyst. He has been known for using non-traditional ways to influence his psychology in his using the subconscious mind and utilizing substances in doing that. Now, he's not a very traditional psychologist, but he definitely had an influence in the psychology realm. And one of the ways that he influenced the understanding the cocaine use is understanding the harmful impacts that it can have on using it as a medicinal property for patients. He prescribed a friend cocaine to treat morphine use disorder, but it also caused paranoia and delusions. In 1914, there was an act called Harrison Narcotics Act and established control over cocaine, heroin, and morphine. In 1970, we deal with the reemergence of cocaine use. And in 1970s, crack epidemic arose. And this was very prominent of, if you look at the social dynamics and the social economical statuses of dealing with the crack epidemic nationally. And in the 1980s, the major administration route was sniffing, which was very hazardous and underestimated of the impacts of cocaine use and crack cocaine. Freebasing, as we discussed, different categories of categorizing drugs. Freebasing was a street name. It's just mixing street cocaine with highly flammable ether. And so this is where we started seeing synthetic drug use mixed with the potency of the traditional cocaine from the cocoa leaf. Again, it became a national crisis in 1886, and this is where there was a prominent understanding of regulation and understanding how there needs to be preventative tools in place to deal with substance use and the epidemics of different substances arising and creating problems. There were 80,000 cocaine-related ER visits, in 1990, compared to 10,000 in 1985. So it was a really big jump on the epidemic and the crisis that arose in 1986 in the late 1980s. Tobacco was first founded through observation of the use through Native Americans through Columbus navigation to the United States, as we call it now. And Native Americans were using it as a medicinal use. And then, as we know, it navigated to the Europe and became a relevant substance that was used within the 1600s in Europe. And it spread out throughout Europe and even in Asian culture. Smoking became prevalent use within the history within the 19th century. However, in the 20th century, there was a decline. And within societal use, 18 to 25 years old is more where cigarette smoking became more of a higher current rate. Now we have the new epidemic of vaping, and there is a higher rate of high school students using it and not really understanding the severity of vaping. They're getting the nicotine fix, but there's not like the adverse effects of cigarettes when it comes to the smoking inhalation. And there's a more increase of usage because of the variations in taste of vapes. Nicotine has effects on the central nervous system because it releases the instant gratification and reward system of dopamine. And we already know that nicotine has impacts on the respiratory system and the cardiovascular system. Again, it impacts physiologically the vascular system, the vascular effects that increases the heart rate and causes damages to the vascular structure. Respiratory system, lungs are impacted by the smoke. There's issues with the system. Appetite is impacted by nicotine use. And again, with substances, you have the chronic health issues and dependency of the substance. We are all familiar with caffeine from drinking coffee, from sodas, and other caffeinated substances. It originated in the Arabian Peninsula. However, there's a lot of myths and stories of the origination of caffeine and how it all became part of our culture. It is difficult to estimate the consumption of worldwide use. We consume it in so many different products, and we sometimes have a hard time keeping up with the potency and the impacts of caffeine worldwide. In the United States, the average is nearly 170 milligrams per day, mostly in coffee, and maybe rising within the 2015 study that was done within the textbook. There's definitely a higher use or intake within some European cultures because of the tea drinking, the UK and Ireland, and top rates are Netherlands, Finland, Sweden, Denmark, and Norway. An estimated of 90% of the world population regularly consume products containing caffeine. Again, caffeine is found in coffee, tea, soda, energy drinks, and chocolate. And we all know that there has been a lot of debate on energy drinks, and also being regulated with age when to consume caffeine. That is another major debate of when should someone have access to caffeine. Our body is not fully developed to 25. People are using substances early on in life can really alter the body cognitively and physiologically. Widely consumed in various forms globally, as we know, average daily intake varies by age, culture, and individual preference, and often consumed for its stimulating effects and social aspects. It can impact mood. Most people drink coffee because there's this innate biased opinion of it helping in the morning. It depends on the person, depends on the potency of caffeine, and even with energy drinks, it varies within the person's, like we discussed, age, culture, and individual preference. It can impact the body negatively or positively, but it's a short-term effect. So it may boost endurance and strength. However, it's temporary. Importance of the side effects is important. It can fluctuate the mood. It can fluctuate the level of energy you have. You have so much energy in the morning or when you take the energy drink, but there's those crashes that sometimes are not put into consideration of the impact that it may have on someone's body and cognitive ability. Tolerance. We discussed there's poor research and there's lack of consistency in research when it comes to understanding tolerance level and the impact of caffeine due to the variations of someone's acceptableness of level of when it comes to how how caffeine can impact the body. But we do know that it can impact function of sleep, blood pressure, and temporary impacts of heart rate, and sometimes lethal impacts on health, on heart rate. There has been unfortunate deaths, especially with younger parties, when it comes to drinking caffeinated drinks or even energy drinks, and the impacts that it has on the heart. Withdrawal symptoms of caffeine, most of the time it's complications with headache and fatigue and lethargicness. It can impact the mood, cause depressive state, less alertness, and fidgetiness. Withdrawals can cause lack of relaxation and contentment. Overall, in any substance, even caffeine, nicotine, and other stimulants, we have to be aware of our own bodies and understand and do our research with substances to see how it impacts us, and even what research has been done about the impacts of the substance. Being mindful of, if you're utilizing a substance, you're becoming dependent and tolerable of that substance, can be a real huge red flag in being cognizant of what you're putting into your body.